new here, and the basic background of what we're doing is that as an industry, the games industry, the UK, when I started off, you can see 1986, me and my mate were two of the original bedroom coders. We set up on a government enterprise scheme, if you remember those back in those days, after doing a little bit of freelancing for a few months before we did that. And in those days, in Britain, we were at the forefront of a lot of game development. We were innovating a lot, we were market leaders. And we've fallen back in recent years. We're now about 5th or 6th, and we used to be always number 1 or number 2. So we've dropped back over time. And part of what we want to do is to encourage younger people to kind of learn some of those skills that we used to have in those days, so they're better equipped to enter the workplace of working in a game development company, which could be in this country, and it could also be equally be abroad actually. But we're finding as an industry that we're getting people coming out of university and they're not really ready to just drop into a job. They're not, they may have some technical skills or some creative skills, but they're not really acclimatised to what kind of tasks they're likely to be expected to do, or within the framework of what kind of team they're meant to be working, to know what completing something really means. You know, you don't get a pat on the back from, I'm a creative director, my job. You don't get a pat on the back from me until it's 100% finished and ready to go into a box with no errors. So the kind of going from a teacher or a mentor or a friend going, yeah, that's great, to having someone like me saying, actually, it's shipped, well done, here's your money. There's a massive difference. And what we're trying to do is to find ways of encouraging people from a younger age to think in ways creatively, and then in time, as they get older, to nurture that creativity into something which is like commercial creativity, which is slightly different. So I think what I'll do is I'll start with just doing a whistle stop of what I've done, so you get a bit of background of me. I'm a BAFTA member. I'm on the BAFTA Games Committee, which is what I'm working with Andy on. BAFTA does TV, film and games. So I'll go through my stuff quickly, and then I'll give you a little bit more about how maybe we want to be working with the children and what we will be talking to them about, and then we'll have some questions. Okay, so I started off in 1986. Me and my friend were in a band. We didn't make any money making music. We were only 18 or 19, and my friend learned how to program. We were very lucky in that he got a job. Then I did some art for him because he was technical. He wasn't an art guy, and then they gave me a job. And then after about 8 months, we worked out that 85% of the money was going to the people who were employing us, and we were doing about 100% of the work. So we set our own company up in the government enterprise scheme, which went on to be quite successful, as you'll see. So our company was called Sensible Software. We were like, for people who don't know what Sensible Software is, we were like like Madness were to the music world. As a British artist being successful in music, we were the equivalent in the 80s and the early 90s in games. At that time, development companies were encouraged to build their names like musical bands would have been. That's not happened so much since the mid-90s. The big corporations have moved in, and you've only heard about Sony and Apple and Microsoft and maybe EA. But in the old days, it used to be the smaller guys like us who were getting the headlines. So this was our first game. We were very lucky. We went up to see Ocean Software in Manchester. Ocean at the time were the leading publisher in the UK. We haven't got many publishers left, by the way, now. But they were the biggest publisher, and we were very lucky in that, if you can imagine, you're 19 years old, you're going to Manchester for the first time on a train. We went with a demo of our game, which we've been working on for 2 or 3 months. And the day we went in there, we showed it to a guy. He said, "Oh, that looks good." Took us to the boss, the guy who ran the whole company, very experienced businessman. He offered us a deal. He offered us a cheque for £1,000, and he signed our game. It was a terrible, terrible deal for us, but it was our break. And this is the break anyone getting into an industry needs, is that lucky break. And we were lucky we got it quickly. So this is Parallax. We went home smoking cigars in the dinner carriage, because you can smoke on trains and those. This is Whizball. This is our second game. This is more well known than Parallax. This actually won a Game of the Decade award retrospectively for the whole 80s from Commodore 64 magazine. And this was the game which set us up creatively as a team. You can see all of the inspiration for these games is kind of like old arcade machines that what we'd have been playing as kids though in those days, because that's what we really had to go on. This was on a Commodore 64, both of these games. And actually we started off on the Spectrum, So we're rewinding time at the moment, okay? This was the next thing we did. This started off as a bunch of little games that my friend Chris, who I work with, and there's still only 2 of us in the company at this point, he made games for me to make, like these little silly games, and I did the art and stuff. But I said to him, look, the tool you've made me is really good, why don't we try and sell the tool? So actually we sold this as a tool to allow people to make their own games on the Commodore 64. And people still use it today and still talk to me about it today, believe it or not. Some of this stuff does have some legacy. So you see as we go through how the big variety of titles that are on this slide, this set of slides. This was the first football game we did. You'll see this is a recurring theme in my softography. Microprose Soccer. This was at the time heralded as the best sports game on any format, believe it or not. And the amazing thing here was graphically, which looks very basic, we're overlaying the coloured sprites with the high-res black and white sprites. You see, this is very technically advanced nowadays. This was again very successful. This game here, Shoot 'em Up Construction, it was our first #1 game, and then this was our second, I think. And these #1s happened kind of across various countries in Europe. We never did anything in the States for whatever reason. This was a beginnings of trying to do 3D. This was still on the Commodore 64. You can see this is early 3D wireframe graphics. If any of you guys know Elite, games like this, it's our take on tennis. It was a bit like a Czech cartoon. It kind of looked like one of those 70s Czech cartoons, but it was quite interesting, but a little bit too left field, I think, to be mainstream. This was our first game on the Amiga, Megalomania. I particularly like this game. This is kind of like a God game. This came out 6 months after Populous, when God games started to emerge. And you can see we're jumping through genres here. We've had a sports game, we've had now this, which is a God game. We had the shoot 'em up games beforehand. So we've always been jumping around different genres. This did very well. Unfortunately, it came out with Microsoft, and it came out 1 month before Mr. Maxwell disappeared off his boat. So he took all our royalties with him, unfortunately, because the people who weren't getting their pensions were more important than us. And I don't think they got them in the end anyway, did they? So then this is our most famous game. This is Sensible Soccer. So this is actually our second football game. Again, this was actually signed with Microsoft, but Microsoft failed to exist, so we re-signed to another company, got our rights back, and it was the best deal we ever did, our best royalty deal ever, so we're all very lucky. The game sold millions of copies, got them in my house and stuff, so I'm very happy with this game. And we went on to do a number of versions of this. You'll see it. This was just playing, and then we added management and other layers, and we kept this going as a franchise for about 5 or 6 years. By this stage, actually, this game here was the first one where we'd taken on another programmer. So we took on another guy, and I worked with him on this. This one here was again with the same guy and another guy. So there's now 2 other guys. So we're up to a team of 6 at this point, which is much bigger for us. And we've jumped forward now to 1992, and we started off in 1986. So we're jumping forward quickly. We're making about a game a year on average, you can see. WizKid was another game we were doing in parallel, so I did this with Chris. This is more of a psychedelic again, and more of an arcade machine style game. So there's some action part, and there's also an adventure game part in this game. This was not so commercially successful, but review-wise it was successful, and it's heralded as being inventive and creative and stuff like this. However, the lesson here is the more inventive you are doesn't necessarily mean the more money you make, and you need as a development company to balance art, technology and commercial common sense. And these are basically the 3 things you juggle forever in what we do. In each of these cases, we're publishing these with different companies. WizKid is actually a sequel to the game Wizball, which we'll be back here, and they all came with the same company, Ocean. This is with Palace Software. This is with Microprose, hence the name. This is with Palace Software again. This is with Microsoft. This was with Renegade, but it would have been with Microsoft. This is Ocean again, and this is Cannon Fodder, which is another game we did at the same time. This is probably our second most successful game franchise. This is with Virgin Software, and again, this is kind of like an early, what we call an RTS game, real-time strategy game. So you're walking around, you're shooting people, and you're avoiding traps, and basically it's just about soldiers going through in a Vietnam-style scenario, breaking off into squads. But again, it's a different type of game. You can see we're jumping into different areas all the time. This is done with our team of 6. This was the first game actually where I didn't do the graphics. So the previous ones were my arts. So my role had been creative direction, code designing, or in the case of from this one was kind of more just my design, mostly my design. This was code design. This is again mostly my design. So I've gone into more the creative direction role as our company's getting bigger. My partner Chris is technically managing everybody, which is an enormous task if anyone works in this area. So, and I've tended to also done the commercial stuff, so doing the deals with the publishing companies, doing the deals with the people internally, doing the contracts, stuff like that. And the royalty accounting as well, very important. This is Sensible World of Soccer. This is a follow-up to Sensible Soccer, and this is where we've added management. So you can see team formations, players. We actually, by the time the final version came out, about 97, we had 23,000 or 27,000 players. There's 1,500 teams all around the world, right down to El Salvador Division 3. So you're then using teams of researchers or a guy basically to head up a team of researchers to make sure the football information is accurate. So every year we would do a new version, update all the data. And that was very successful. And this game is kind of the peak of what we've done actually. This is the only European developed game to be in the Stanford University about 5 years ago, did a top 10 influential games ever, which includes things like Space Invaders and stuff like that. This is the only European developed game in there. And it's actually the only sports game as well. And it was the most modern game. In 1992 it was relatively modern compared to the old stuff they were talking about. This is Cannon Fodder 2. You can see it's a sequel to Cannon Fodder. This is how the business works. So you make a bunch of games, and some of them stick, like Sensible Soccer turned into Sensible World of Soccer, Cannon Fodder turned into Cannon Fodder 2, Whizball turned into WizKid. And the more successful franchises or IPs, intellectual properties, stick, and the rest kind of fall by the wayside. And this is how it works. And a successful creative company is about minimising the risk. So every new game is a gamble. And what good publishing companies have got to understand is their job is to make the best, most educated gambles they can. Now what's happened recently is that you've seen as things have become more and more commercial. We're still only in 1994 here. This is just before the big corporates that are going to move in. Sony, Bertelsmann, Warner came into our industry and basically took the control away from the smaller companies, which was the publishing companies were still relatively small here, even though they're names like Virgin and Microsoft, they were still small arms of big corporations, but these were like big media giants coming in and enforcing their economic policy. And still at this point, Britain is still near the top of the pole in creativity now. And it's about to disappear as all of us were offered more money to go with these bigger corporations, and we all said yes. We all ended up powerless and being pushed around by people who are mostly from different countries. Just like the motor industry, I guess. So this is Sensible Golf. This was the weakest of our titles. You might see we've got a theme running through these little guys here. This became like our trademark in all of these games. Where we got it. This is a different style again. So, and that traces right the way back to Megalomania. Sensible Golf was a case of us biting off more than we could chew. We basically were at the top of our tree. We were one of the top development companies in Europe actually, and we just took on as much work as we could, but the problem was we didn't have the focus to maintain it on all the projects properly, and this kind of, it was okay, I mean it did well, but it wasn't to the level we were at. We were having constant #1 games and being, for about a 3-year period, we had 52 weeks of #1 with various games, so we had a standard to maintain, and this kind of dropped it a little bit. So then, the advent of 3D, which kind of scuppered Sensible Software. This is a good lesson in how technology works. So you can see all those games are 2D games. The art style is sprites, flat, a bit like iPhones and stuff. A lot of games are now. And then 3D came in. At the same time, the big media companies came in. And suddenly, everyone wanted 3D. So people wanted Sensible Soccer to be in 3D. The problem is, it doesn't play as well in 3D. But we couldn't get a deal if it was in 2D. And so you have often this, part of the creativity process for us as designers and games makers is to also have to work within the confines of the current commercial demands, which are constantly changing in terms of technology, in terms of how you sell things, in terms of how you socialise things now. And this time 3D was the flavour. Regardless of whether it needed 3D or not, you had to stuff it into a 3D engine. In our case, for our game, it took us a long while. We were about a year or two behind other companies working on 3D because we were the most successful 2D development company. We didn't want any change, and we changed too late technologically, and it floored us actually. We had another game, we had a game called Sex, Drugs and Rock and Roll, which was an adventure game at the same time, which again had problems. It had some problems because of the content. It was a bit racy, it was a bit an 18 plus game, but that wasn't the problem. We signed it to Warner, it was a sound deal. The problem was we couldn't handle the 3D it needed easily enough, and technically we had lots of internal problems, and even another game as well we had a problem with called Have a Nice Day. So this was okay, but it didn't have the same natural success and easy feel as Sensible Soccer did originally. So then at this point, about 1999, we sold Sensible Software because we realised what we'd done. We'd started off as two kids in a band. We'd ended up with a very successful development company working on 2D titles. We'd had, by that time, 7 #1 games. And people wanted 3D, and this game did get to #1 on the strength of the title, but in the long term it wasn't quite as good, and we realised, in our case, we didn't want to go up to an 80-man team that we worked out we needed to have. We were already 20 guys now, we didn't want to get any bigger. We didn't want to be a corporation. So we sold our company to Codemasters, this company here, who are still around, and actually those and Jagex are pretty much the only British publishing companies of any note left at the moment. There's not very many left, because most of them have sold. There's been lots of acquisitions, and mostly being bought by Japanese or French or American companies within the last 15 years or so. So I started to move into design consulting here, and you can see the boxing game we did. That took me into work on Prince Nassim boxing at the end to try and help out on that, and then that was okay. And then we did Mike Tyson, which I had a bit more of a substantial creative direction role in from the start. So that's mapping out the design, working with the team. We were up in Middlesbrough, and finishing the game off. This was on PlayStation and Xbox, I think, this particular one we're in, around about now. Yeah. On PS2 actually. We did start on a Cannon Fodder 3, but it never actually went anywhere, and they stopped it. The history of canned titles is alarming to creative people. Between Sex, Drugs and Rock and Roll and Cannon Fodder 3, I think, there was 6 years of my creative life that never even got published. This is another reality for people working in our industry. So in about 2004, I set up a company called Tales Studios with 2 of the guys from the Bitmap Brothers. I don't know if any of you know them. They were an equivalent team like Sensible Software back in the 80s and 90s, another one of the hit British development teams. And we set up Tower between us, myself, Mike Montgomery, who I'm going to see this evening actually, and John Phillips, who's a technical director. And we started making mobile games because mobile phone games became the fashion. And we did, as you can see, a version of Sensible Soccer, a version of Cannon Fodder, because we got the rights, and a rugby game, which did okay. It's quite topical now. It's 2 World Cups ago. Okay, so this was okay. Again, these were hit games. These became #1 games, but the money wasn't that good for us, so we moved on. And I carried on doing consulting, quite a lot of consulting actually. So I've been consulting, even with Codemasters I was really consulting. So I did quite a lot of consulting with this company, Vikatova Games, who are based in Kiev in Ukraine. So now, in order to get the work that I need, I'm having to move around Europe. I'm having to, basically, I'm a resource, and I charge by the day, or however the deal works with some royalties. And I go to wherever the work is, which is something I've been doing, even with Codemasters I did this in Leamington Spa, they're based. So we did another boxing game. This is now the 3rd boxing game. You see themes start to reoccur. When you've got a reputation for making a certain type of game, you tend to more easily get the contracts for other ones which are similar. That's the way it works. We did this, which is M&M's Adventure. This is a good example of a license, M&M's in this case, and just slap it into a game and try to make something happen. Not the best game I've ever made by a long way. It's a bit like a very poor man's Super Mario 64 running around collecting stars. You were collecting M&M's in a factory. Yeah? And Casper the Friendly Ghost, which I quite like. This is a little game. These are both on the Wii, and this is on the DS. So this is for children, this game. This is about going to school and basically, whilst the teachers are teaching the lessons, when their backs are turned, you've got to run around and swap things around with your friends and then sit back at the desk the teacher tells you how to get through these games. It's got lovely art, this particular game. In fact, this company is interesting because, as you can see, is representative here. Games has always been male-dominated, pretty much forever, and programming-wise, I think there always probably will be very few girls involved in game programming. A, they're not that interested in it, and B, the environment, the competitive, ego-driven nature of a lot of programmers, I think actually puts girls off getting involved in it because it can become a battle of egos in the technical world. However, Nikitova was a company which was run by a woman, and on the art side, it's pretty much 50-50 of male and female. And actually, as we go through and talk about this a little bit more and look at roles that girls can have within the creation of games, certainly with art and to a certain extent with design as well, there's no reason why girls can't do as much as boys can. There are quite a few examples of successful female designers as well in the UK now. So that's something to think about in terms of taking it to the whole school and involving everybody. I don't think it's sensible to try and put people in holes they don't naturally fit into, but I think we should be encouraging girls to look at the art side. There's a lot of skills and things that people can bring, and there's no reason why they shouldn't be thoroughly involved. As I say, certainly in this company, they had 80 female artists in this company. It was about 250 people. So. Okay, I've done a lot of football games, so this is just some highlights of various bits of consulting. This is Football Superstars. I don't know if you know about this. This is an online game on PC where you play as one player, and then you play with other guys who are doing the same thing. ICANN Football, similar kind of thing, more in a sensible soccer style. This is done with a company in Turkey, my friend's company, so I worked over there for a while. This is Real Madrid, the game. I did this with the guys I did the boxing game with at Middlesbrough. And this is Sensible Soccer 2006, which we made in Sheffield with a team there. This is via Codemasters. So I'm working again as a consultant with them. So you can see, as you get me up to 2009 now, it's just reoccurring themes, they just keep on coming back. This is how you build a career with this. And these are the other bits of consulting I've done. So Funnel was with Jagex. I did that actually, I was employed by them technically for a small while, but this is looking at a whole bunch of small games on the PC, like the kind of browser kind of games you might see. That was looking at the whole system and was very interesting and open minded to publishing. This is Real World Golf, which was something called a game track. We had a little box on the floor with a string and some gloves, and you do this. It was just before the Wii. So I did this with another company in Leamington Spa. This is Doctor Who, which wasn't the best game I worked on, it's a Wii version. I did that last year with a company in London. Again, this is working with a license, working with the BBC, working with Nintendo, so you have to jump through all these various hoops as well and learn to do this. In this case, I came in as an emergency designer at the end. 2 months ago, we've got to get the game out for Christmas, help kind of work, which is quite fun actually, to do kind of stuff. And I pretty much did the same in here. Alien Puzzle Adventure. So in recent years, the last 2 years, I've been working a lot with a team called Vivid Games in Poland. And this is a game I did with them, which came out through a company called Mastertronic, who's a very old British publisher. I don't think it's sold hardly anything. It's on DSiWare, one of these platforms that have been made up recently. But it's a little puzzle game. So my focus in the last 2 years has been on my publishing company, Tail Studios. So what we do is, on the smaller platforms, on your iPhones, and recently we've done Sony Minis and Android, we're looking at Google Chrome, we're looking at Facebook, we're looking at browser, and all these smaller platforms. It's very open for people to self-publish at the moment. It's something which, when we're talking to older kids, I do some university lecturing as well, and when you're talking to older people who are or college age, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 22, I think it's important to get them focused on these kind of platforms where you really have got opportunities, if you've got the skill, to actually make something of your own idea happen and be published. So this is kind of how we'd like to build people towards this mentality. However, if you're dealing with younger children now, by the time they're 19 or 20, the whole goalposts are going to have changed anyway, because they always do. So you have to be willing to be, you have to have your ear to the ground on what's actually needed from the industry at any time. But right now is a great opportunity for people who want to start, if they're old enough, we've got the right people. So this is just an application where you text message, and as you text message, you have 3D faces and they smile and look happy. So this is you talking to your friend, changing your expression. This again I did with the guys in Wolverhampton. This is Shoot to Kill. This is the first game we put out with the guys in Poland, and it's one of their ideas which I helped them to make more complete and more professional. This is a classic arcade style game for an iPhone. We put out last year. This is Speedball 2 Evolution. So this is our game that came out this March. It's been thankfully very successful. We're back to having #1 games again after a small absence. And as I said, we've just done that on iPhone, Android, Mac, Symbian, Sony Minis, and Google Chrome. And this is a remake of a classic game from the Benmack brothers, Speedball. So this is actually, even this week, we launched the Sony Minis version on Monday, and we're doing the Google Chrome one, hopefully in 2 days' time. That's kind of where my life is right now, this title. And also this one. So this is World Explorer. This is a game which I'm happy to show people if they want to see it. This is my new game. It's the first original design I have done since WizKid. No, Cannon Fodder. Right back in 1993. So but what's basically happened is we had a period where everyone wanted original games and we could sign them. And then when the corporations came in, they didn't want our original stuff. They wanted licenses. They wanted stuff they could control from a business side. And now with my own company, I can go back to publishing my own stuff again, and this is the first one. So this is something which, although we can self-publish, I'm hoping to sign up with a bigger publisher right now. Hopefully the demo of this will be finished by the end of this week, and we're talking to all the bigger players you can think of. We just keep conversations going, and we see if they want to buy it. And this is what we do on the business side. And this is a word game. This is actually a highly educational game, as it's turned out. So you click on a word, it brings up an anagram of a word with the clue, and you solve it like a crossword. And as you solve the crossword, so you expand this map out, and you're travelling between cities. So this is someone in the States at the moment, and this is Platte River. You're travelling to somewhere down here we can't see, maybe the Mojave Desert or something. So, and as you travel around, you get these words here. So the yellow words are photo opportunity words, and there's things like cities. This is Aurora, which is a city. Or you might get, this is a lynx here. This is the lynx, it's a photo of the lynx. And you can click on the lynx and you get some information about lynxes and something about the species and stuff. So for me, this is fun to work for slightly higher brow stuff, not necessarily higher brow, but for so long now, games have been to lowest common denominator intelligence people, which I'm getting a little bit bored of, to be honest. So this is deliberately aimed at people who maybe have got a bit more intelligence, and actually it's wide open for different platforms and hits any age group and goes to both male and female pretty equally. So as creative people, you get tired of hitting 20-year-old boys with stuff forever. It does get rather dull after a while. So anyway, this is pretty much a little summary of everything I've done in the last maybe 25 years now, and I hope it kind of gives you an insight into the variety of stuff you're working on, the different kind of formats you're working on, the different kind of games, the different commercial setups, and how you have to respond to them quickly, commercially, in order to survive in a creative environment on a professional level.